David looked out of the window of his dealership, a space that once pulsed with life and enthusiasm, but now was filled with an atmosphere of despair. The cars on display seemed more like shadows than offers. Their vibrant colors had faded under the weight of reality. The traffic noise outside, which once promised sales, now served as a constant reminder of his downfall. It was a cold Tuesday morning, and the air was filled with an uncomfortable silence. David forced himself to open the glass door, hoping for a customer to walk in. But the day dragged on, and all he saw were familiar faces hurrying by, ignoring the store that had once been the source of his pride for so many years. Financial troubles had started months ago, but he never imagined his business could reach this point. Sales had plummeted, and debt began to pile up like a shadow that wouldn't let him be. He remembered the days when the dealership was full of customers, the laughter and conversations about new cars echoing through the walls. Now, the only echo was the sound of his own frustration. David moved away from the window and returned to his office, where stacks of bills and financial reports cluttered his desk. He rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the pressure on his shoulders. Sleepless nights had become his constant companion, and conversations with the banks had turned into a recurring nightmare. The possibility of closing the doors seemed increasingly real. As he examined the discouraging numbers, the sound of the doorbell made him look up. A customer? Hope sparked in his heart, but quickly faded when he saw that the person entering was just a homeless man, dressed in ragged clothes with a lost look in his eyes. David felt a mix of compassion and discouragement. The last thing he needed was another reminder of his own struggles. The man approached, eyes downcast, and asked for some food. David hesitated, thinking about how he was struggling to keep his business afloat. But as he looked at the homeless man again, something stopped him from shutting the door. He saw the fragility in the man's expression, and for a moment, remembered how his own life could have unfolded differently. "I'm sorry, I don't have much to offer," David said, his voice choking. "But please come in and sit for a moment. I can offer you some coffee." The homeless man looked at him, surprised by the offer, and a slight smile formed on his face. "Thank you, sir, I don't want to be a bother." David gestured for him to come in, feeling that perhaps the small connection he was about to make could be a relief for both of them. As the man settled into a chair, David realized that despite his own struggles, there was immense value in showing compassion, even amid the chaos of his life. It was a small choice, but maybe it was a step in the right direction, a light in the darkness surrounding his struggling dealership. And so, as the coffee brewed, David began to wonder if this unexpected connection could bring not only comfort, but also a new perspective on what truly mattered in tough times. David poured a steaming cup of coffee and looked at the man in front of him, who was now seated in a worn-out chair. The homeless man, with unkempt hair and an unshaven beard, appeared to be in a state of deep exhaustion. His stained and trembling hands held the cup with almost reverent care, as if this simple act of kindness was something rare in his life. "My name is David," he introduced himself, forcing a smile in an attempt to break the silence that had settled between them. "And what's your name?" "Tom," the homeless man replied, his voice rough but firm. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. David." David watched as Tom took a sip, his eyes closing for a moment in appreciation. The aroma of the coffee filled the air, bringing a bit of warmth to the cold atmosphere of the dealership. However, the look in Tom's eyes spoke of much more than just hunger. There was a story hidden behind his tired gaze. "Are you going through hard times?" David asked, feeling the need to know more. He realized that while he was dealing with his own issues, the man in front of him carried a weight that might be even harder to bear. "Yes, it's been a while," Tom replied, sadness evident in his words. "I used to have a home, but things changed. Sometimes everything you've built can come crashing down in an instant." Tom's words hit David like a blow. He thought about his own struggle, how the dealership that had once been his life had now become a burden. The fact that Tom had lost everything touched his heart in an unexpected way. The man in front of him was not just a homeless person. He was a reflection of a reality that David might soon face if things didn't change. "Sorry, Tom. I didn't mean to make you relive tough times," David said, his voice carrying a tone of empathy. I know how hard it can be sometimes." Tom shook his head, a faint smile appearing on his lips. "Don't worry. Talking helps. Sometimes all we need is someone to listen. I'm grateful for that." David sat down in front of Tom, feeling that something deeper was forming between them. The homeless man wasn't just asking for food or shelter. He was sharing a part of himself, a glimpse of his humanity amidst his struggle for survival. It was a powerful reminder that everyone has a story, and that the simple act of listening could forge unexpected connections. Are you enjoying the story so far? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this one. "Do you need a place to stay?" David asked, surprised by the offer that had slipped from his mouth. The desperation in his own life hadn't stopped him from feeling compassion for someone else. The urge to help was stronger than his own fears. "You can stay here at the dealership for a while." Tom looked at David, his eyes shining with gratitude and surprise. "You'd do that for me? I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden, Tom. We all go through hard times. We all deserve a bit of compassion," David replied, feeling that this act of kindness could be a new beginning, not just for Tom, but for him as well. And so, as the two men shared coffee and stories of their lives, David realized that this unexpected encounter could be more than just a coincidence. It was an opportunity for connection in a moment of crisis, a reminder that even in tough times, kindness and empathy could still flourish, lighting up the darkness surrounding them. David watched Tom savor the coffee as if each sip were a small celebration. The man seemed to transform with every moment, the lines of worry on his face starting to soften as the warmth of the liquid brought him some comfort. Yet despite this, David felt a weight in his heart. The idea of opening his dealership to a stranger, even one as kind as Tom, was a risk that made him anxious. "Look, Tom," David began, hesitating. "I really want to help, but you understand that this isn't exactly an appropriate place to stay, right? The dealership is, well, it's my business. There's not much space, and it's a pretty unusual environment." Tom nodded, but the hope in his eyes didn't fade. "I understand, David. I just need a roof over my head for a few days. I don't want to be a burden. I just need a safe place while I look for a way to start over." David thought about his own struggles. He knew what it was like to fight to keep his head above water. Like Tom, he sometimes felt lost. The sense of despair and the struggle to find a way out of the crisis were experiences they both shared. "I could stay in a hotel or a shelter, but they're usually full, and I don't want to be just another face lost in the crowd," Tom continued, his voice filled with sincerity. "I just want a little dignity, even if only for a short time." David's heart ached. He was reluctant, but the sincerity in Tom's tone touched something deep within him. He remembered his mother's words, which always said that an act of kindness could change someone's day, or even their life. And suddenly, the thought of leaving a vulnerable man out on the street bothered him more than the possibility of opening his dealership to a stranger. "All right, Tom," David said, deciding that compassion was more important than his discomfort. "You can stay here for a week, but we need to establish some rules. The dealership isn't a home, and I still need to work." A radiant smile lit up Tom's face. "Thank you, David. I promise I won't cause any trouble. I'll stay out of your way and help wherever I can." As they talked, David began to feel more comfortable with the idea. He was not only offering shelter but also an opportunity to do something good in a time of crisis. The act of kindness he was about to undertake filled him with hope. With that, David and Tom started discussing how life at the dealership could work. David explained the schedules, tasks, and even the basic rules of living together. Tom listened attentively, his expression determined and grateful. He was ready to make the most of this chance. As the day went on, sunlight streamed through the dealership's windows, and David began to sense that there was something special about his decision. Welcoming Tom wasn't just an act of generosity. It was a way to reconnect with his own humanity amid the crisis. And so, as the two prepared to face the upcoming week, David realized that by opening the door of the dealership, he was also opening a door to new possibilities, not just for Tom, but for himself. The road ahead was still uncertain, but kindness would become a light to guide them through dark times. The first week at the dealership passed faster than David had imagined. Tom settled into a corner of the workshop, where there was a small, worn-out sofa that served as a resting area for the mechanics during busy days. With a blanket he found in one of the used cars, he created a space that felt cozy and safe. In the days that followed, while David worked on sales and attended to the few customers that came in, Tom proved to be a great support. He helped organize the store, cleaning the display cars and even fixing small mechanical issues he had learned to solve. The man who had seemed so lost and vulnerable was starting to show skills that David hadn't expected. As the routine settled in, David and Tom began to talk. At first, it was just casual words about work and daily tasks, but gradually the conversations evolved. David sat with Tom during breaks, and they both started sharing their stories, opening up in ways that surprised them both. When I was younger, David began during one of these moments, I dreamed of being a mechanic. My passion for cars started with my father. He had a small shop, and I helped him every weekend. His gaze drifted off into memories, and he smiled as he recalled the simple moments he shared with his father. Tom listened attentively, his eyes shining with interest. "My dad loved cars too," he said with a nostalgic smile on his face. "He was a big businessman and always took me to car shows. But what really marked me was how he always helped others, especially those less fortunate. He taught me to be kind and to value every person no matter their situation." David was surprised. He had imagined that Tom's life was just filled with hardships, but now he saw that there was a light in his past, a legacy of kindness that he still carried. "So you've always had a good example," David remarked, admiring the strength of character Tom seemed to possess. Tom nodded, looking a bit sad. "Yes, but I lost that. You know, when life started to fall apart, I distanced myself from my family and lost that connection. Sometimes things get out of control and you end up losing your way." As the week went on, the friendship between them began to blossom. David saw Tom not just as a homeless man, but as a friend, someone who understood him in a new way. They laughed together, shared meals, and even exchanged ideas about the cars on display. The atmosphere in the dealership started to change, and a sense of warmth filled the place. One afternoon, while having a snack on the sofa, David looked at Tom and said, "You know, you remind me of what's important. Amid all this crisis, I was so focused on trying to save the dealership that I forgot that true wealth lies in the connections we make. Thank you for being here." Tom smiled, a glimmer of gratitude in his eyes. "And I'm grateful for you giving me this opportunity. Sometimes all we need is someone who believes in us. You've helped me reconnect with who I really am." The friendship blossoming between them was a testament to how vulnerability could create unbreakable bonds. David realized that even amidst struggle, there was room for love and camaraderie. They were two men facing different battles, but finding comfort and strength in each other. The week unfolded, and amid life's uncertainties, David and Tom were transforming, not only as individuals, but as friends sharing an unexpected path, a journey that promised to change their lives forever. As David and Tom's friendship deepened, memories of a distant past began to seep into Tom's mind. The conversations and laughter in the dealership served as a trigger, bringing to the surface a childhood he had tried to forget, but that still pulsed in his memory like an unhealed scar. In a flashback, Tom saw himself as a child again, running through a lush garden in a luxurious mansion. The scent of fresh flowers and his mother's joyful laughter filled the air. He remembered the sparkle in her eyes as she watched him play. But behind the joy was a distant father, always caught up in business meetings and commitments. Tom never fully understood his father's absence, but felt the lack of love that should have come from him. "Tommy, come here," his mother would call, but there was always a sense that the real call was coming from elsewhere. A father who always seemed just out of reach. The image of his father, a formidable man in expensive suits, was etched in his mind, but the emotional connection was scarce. Each visit to his father's office left Tom feeling small and invisible among the adults who talked about money and business, while he just wanted attention and affection. The memories began to darken. The atmosphere in the mansion changed when Tom's mother fell ill. Her smile slowly faded, and the light that once filled their home turned into a heavy shadow. His father, more concerned with his career than with the family, distanced himself even further. Tom, now a teenager, felt abandoned. The man who was supposed to be his hero had become a distant figure, someone he barely recognized. One night, as Tom waited for his father to come home, emotions overflowed. He confronted his father, the words pouring out with the force of years of pent-up resentment. "You don't care about me. All you do is work. Where were you when Mom was sick?" His father, taken aback, tried to explain that he was doing his best to support the family, but Tom didn't want to hear it. "You're not a father. You're just a man who cares about money. If you really cared, you would be here." The words cut deep, and his father's reaction was a painful silence. Instead of feeling loved, Tom felt an abyss open between them. The confrontation marked the beginning of his escape. He decided he could no longer live under the same roof as a man who didn't understand his emotional needs. And so, he left home, carrying the pain of rejection with him. Years passed, and Tom got lost. Initially, he lived on the streets, searching for a place in the world. But the feeling of abandonment never left him. Life on the streets was not kind, and he learned to survive day by day, masking the pain with pride. The boy who once ran joyfully through the garden was now a man marked by loneliness and struggle. Returning to the present, sitting on the dealership sofa with David, Tom felt a mix of nostalgia and sadness. He had tried to move on, but the memories were always there, like ghosts haunting him. Now, as he opened his heart to David, he was beginning to realize that he needed to confront those memories, not as a burden, but as part of who he was. "I've wasted a lot of time," Tom said, looking down. "But you've made me see that there's still hope. Sometimes we just need someone who truly sees us." David listened attentively, understanding that Tom's journey was more complex than he had imagined. The childhood stories and the tumultuous relationship with his wealthy father were not just details of the past, but essential pieces of a man who was rebuilding himself. As they talked, a new understanding formed between them, a connection that transcended their individual struggles, creating a safe space for healing and friendship. Richard walked through the busy city streets, his heart heavy with the anguish that followed him with every step. He remembered all the sleepless nights, restless with the absence of his son. The separation had become a burden, a constant reminder of his failures as a father. The last time Tom crossed his path, they had clashed in a way that Richard couldn't forget. Now he felt lost, like a sailor adrift, navigating unknown waters without a map. The search for Tom was not just about finding his son, it was about restoring what had been lost. Richard had always been a businessman, focused on success and building his career. But as time passed, he realized he had neglected what truly mattered. His relationship with Tom had deteriorated under the weight of obligations and commitments, and now he was determined to correct his mistakes. With his phone in hand, Richard reviewed the messages he had sent to his son, all unanswered. The words that once seemed like mere formalities now resonated like silent cries, pleading for attention. He stopped in front of a park where children were playing, parents were smiling, and couples were sharing tender moments. A wave of nostalgia washed over him. He remembered how he used to take Tom to the park, where their happiness felt infinite. But those memories were overshadowed by the pain of separation. "Tom, where are you?" he murmured to himself, his voice choked. Richard knew he couldn't afford to give up. He began asking people on the street, in cafes and stores, if anyone had seen his son. A young man, brown hair looking worn. He described Tom, hoping that someone might recognize him. The responses he received were a mix of compassion and indifference. Some offered encouraging words while others simply shook their heads, disappointed. Richard felt like he was facing a lonely battle, but the determination to find his son fueled him with every step. After hours of searching, he entered a small convenience store where he was greeted with friendly service. "I'm looking for my son. He has been missing for some time," Richard said, his voice heavy with despair. "Could you help me?" The clerk looked at him with a mix of empathy and understanding. Sometimes people go through hard times, but they still hang around here. The best place to start is in the areas where homeless people tend to stay. There are some shelters and help centers nearby. The information ignited a new flame of hope within Richard. "Thank you," he said, feeling renewed. It was a small step, but it was enough to reignite his determination. With a new focus, he left the store and headed toward the area where homeless people often gathered. He needed to see for himself, to feel that there was still a chance to reconnect with Tom. As he walked through the streets, Richard came across a group of people sitting in a corner. His heart raced in his chest when he saw the image of a young man sitting on a cardboard couch, his familiar silhouette. But as he got closer, he realized the figure was not Tom. It was just an echo of what he feared he had lost. Still, he didn't give up. Richard continued his tireless search, determined to find his son. He remembered the words Tom always said when they were closer. "Family is what really matters, Dad." That truth echoed in his mind as he walked, and every time he thought of Tom, the urgency to restore that connection drove him forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Richard made his way to a dealership he knew Tom might have visited. He wasn't sure, but the hope that his son could be there fueled his journey. As he entered the dealership, his heart raced, and he felt on the verge of a moment that could change everything. The search was reaching a climax, and the possibility of reuniting with his son filled him with both anxiety and hope. Richard crossed the threshold of the dealership and the bell above the door chimed, echoing in a space that was once familiar. The smell of new cars and the shine of the showrooms, which used to bring him memories of happiness, now mixed with the anxiety pulsing in his chest. He looked around, his eyes fixed on the unfamiliar faces of customers and employees passing by. The hope of finding Tom pushed him forward. Richard approached the service desk, where a young employee was organizing some papers. "Excuse me," he began, his voice a little shaky. "I'm looking for my son. His name is Tom, and I heard he might be here." The employee looked up, surprised. "Tom? Yes, he's here. He was around last week. Really nice guy. Do you know where he might be?" Richard felt a rush of adrenaline at those words. Relief and anticipation intertwined in his heart. He's here? He could barely contain his emotion. "Do you know where I can find him?" "He should be in the workshop." "Let me call him," the young man said, quickly getting up and heading toward the back door. Richard stood there, anxiety building in his chest. The thought of seeing Tom again, of having the chance to reconcile, was almost overwhelming. He allowed himself to imagine the moment when he would finally have his son back in his arms, the pain and distance dissipating like morning fog. As he waited, Richard's mind drifted to all the years he had lost contact with Tom. He remembered the fights, the bitter words, and the impulsive decision to leave home. Each moment weighed heavily on his shoulders. But now, there was a light at the end of the tunnel, a chance to redeem himself and restore the relationship they had always wanted. The door opened, and with a smile on his face, Tom appeared, surprised to see his father. Time seemed to freeze for a moment. Richard looked at his son, and in his mind, all the memories of a happy childhood came flooding back. Tom, with his unkempt hair and the expression of someone who had faced challenges, looked more mature, but his essence remained the same. "Dad?" Tom murmured, his voice hesitant. Incredulity and hope mixed in his eyes. "Tom, I came to find you," Richard replied, his voice filled with emotion. He stepped forward, almost as if he wanted to hug him, but hesitated, fearing that his son might pull away. The two men stared at each other, the silence between them heavy with meaning. It was a silence that spoke of years of separation, pain and regret, but also of love and a desire to reconnect. Richard felt vulnerable, but there was a strength in his heart urging him not to let this opportunity slip away. "I'm so sorry, Tom, I was wrong. I should have been there for you," Richard said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm here now, and I want to listen to you. I want to know how you're doing." Tom was silent for a moment, emotions flickering across his face like a storm. He remembered the unspoken words, the pain of feeling abandoned, but also the gratitude for seeing his father there, ready to listen. I'm struggling, Dad, but I'm trying to get back on my feet. I just don't know how to do it alone. Richard felt a wave of compassion and urgency. The connection was there, and he knew that despite the mistakes of the past, he could be the anchor Tom needed. You're not alone anymore. We're in this together, Tom. I want to help you. Let's rebuild what we lost. In that moment, something changed between them. The growing anticipation transformed into a renewed commitment of love and support. Richard knew there was still a lot to do, but the impactful revelation that his son was there in front of him was the first step of a new journey. And as they looked at each other, the past began to fade away, making room for a future full of possibilities. As Richard and Tom exchanged emotionally charged words, David, who was in the workshop, couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening. The scene before him was more than a reunion. It was an explosion of feelings that made the atmosphere vibrate. However, curiosity and tension began to build within him. Who was Tom, really? The conversation flowed between father and son, each word filling the empty spaces left by time and distance. David, while moved by the sincerity of the moment, also felt intrigued. He sensed that there was more to Tom's story than the homeless man he had met days earlier. After a few minutes, Tom turned to David, who was watching the scene with a cautious smile. David, this is my father, Richard. He's back in my life. Tom's voice trembled, but there was a new hope in it, a light that hadn't been there when he first arrived at the dealership. David felt a mix of joy and apprehension. Nice to meet you, Richard, he said, extending his hand. You have an amazing son. Richard shook David's hand, his eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you for taking care of Tom. He's spoken a lot about you, and I'm grateful that you opened your home to him. As the conversation continued, David decided it was time to ask some questions. He needed to understand more about the connection forming between the two. May I ask how you ended up in this situation, Tom? His voice was gentle, but curiosity was evident. Tom hesitated, looking at Richard, who gave an encouraging gesture. I'm not just a homeless person, Tom began, his voice tense. I grew up in a wealthy family, but life took an unexpected turn. I distanced myself from my father, and it led me to a place of despair. David frowned, confused. You're the son of a rich man? That's surprising. He would never have imagined that the man who had taken him in, someone who seemed so lost, had such a complex story. Tom took a deep breath and continued. I had everything, but I lost my connection with my father and with what really mattered. When I distanced myself, I was unable to handle the pressure and ended up living on the streets. Life became a daily struggle, but here with you, I found a bit of hope. The revelation hit the dealership like a bomb. Richard looked at David, understanding beginning to dawn. David, I own one of the largest automotive companies in the city. When I learned that Tom was lost, I did everything I could to find him. Your kindness in taking him in meant more than you can imagine. David fell silent, the reality of what he was hearing slowly sinking in. The image of the homeless man he had helped was now illuminated in a new light. He remembered the conversations he had with Tom, the stories they shared, and how, even in his simplicity, Tom had shown himself to be someone with incredible depth. So you are, David started, trying to process the information. Yes, I am his father, and I'm here to correct my mistakes. Not just to find my son, but to rebuild the relationship I let fade away. And you, David, have been the bridge that brought us together, Richard replied, emotion evident in his voice. The big twist felt like a breath of fresh air in a stuffy room. David experienced a wave of understanding and compassion. He had helped a man without knowing that this man was part of a much bigger story. Life is full of surprises, and what seemed like a simple act of kindness had now become a catalyst for family reconnection. I'm here to help. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me, David said, feeling that this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Tom and Richard, but for himself as well. And so, in a space that had once been just a dealership, 3 lives were about to intertwine in a way none of them could have imagined. Life, with its unexpected twists, had a peculiar way of showing that even in the darkest hours, the light of hope can shine brighter. The atmosphere in the dealership was charged with emotion after Tom's revelation. Richard, still recovering from the shock, looked into David's eyes and felt a deep gratitude welling up inside him. The kindness that this man had shown by welcoming his son was a gesture he would never forget. "David," Richard began, his voice choked with emotion. "I can't express how grateful I am for you opening the doors of your dealership to Tom. You not only provided him shelter but also a safe space for him to reconnect with life. That's something few would do, and I am eternally grateful for it." David, feeling a bit embarrassed, looked down. "I just did what anyone would do. Tom needed help and I couldn't just stand by." "No, you don't understand," Richard insisted, his voice more firm. "What you did was so much more than just offering a roof. You gave my son a place to feel valued and supported, and that, my friend, is priceless." Tom looked at the two, feeling a mix of emotions inside him. He felt a warmth in his chest, a deep connection between his father and the man who had become a friend. Richard's gratitude was not just for his generosity, but for the impact it had on his life. Richard took a deep breath, sensing that he was about to open his heart. "As a way of thanking you, I would like to offer you financial help. I know your dealership is struggling, and I want to do something to assist you. It's the least I can do." David looked up, surprised. "Richard, that's not necessary. I didn't help Tom expecting anything in return." "I know," Richard replied, sincerity in his eyes. "But life is about exchanges, and that's how it should work. What you did for Tom taught me that in times of crisis, generosity becomes an act of love. I want you to know that you're not alone in this. If I can help save your dealership, it would be an honor for me." Tom looked at his father, his heart racing. He knew Richard was not just a businessman, he was a man with a heart. And for the first time, he felt that the relationship he had lost was being restored, not only between them, but also with David, a man who had become a true friend. "Richard, that means a lot to me," David said, emotion evident in his voice. "I'm not used to accepting help, but the idea of being able to save the dealership and keep this space alive for the community touches me deeply. Thank you." Grateful for Richard's generosity and vision, David felt he was receiving more than just financial assistance. It was an opportunity to start anew, to revitalize the dealership, and give Tom a new home, a new life. As the 3 men stood in that transformed space, each felt that something special was happening. Gratitude and generosity were not just words. They were actions that created bonds, renewed hopes, and offered a future that had once seemed bleak. And so, in that dealership, life was about to rise again, fueled by an act of kindness that went beyond expectations, showing that even in the most challenging situations, the light of friendship and love can always shine brightly. The weeks that followed the surprising revelation were filled with transformation and renewal. The dealership, once mired in debt and uncertainty, now thrived with new energy. Richard not only offered financial assistance, but also brought with him an entrepreneurial vision that began to revitalize the business. He and David became partners, combining their skills and experiences to create a more welcoming and dynamic environment. Richard introduced new marketing strategies, focusing on creating a unique experience for customers. Community events, special promotions, and a renewed attention to customer service brought back the regulars. David saw sales increase, and the sparkle in customers' eyes began to return, filling the dealership with life and hope. Tom, in turn, found a new purpose within the dealership. He started working alongside David and Richard, not just as a helper, but as a true member of the team. His passion for cars, which had once seemed a distant memory, surged back with vigor. He learned about sales, mechanics, and even helped organize events, feeling part of something bigger again. The relationship between father and son also blossomed. Over time, Richard and Tom sat down for deep conversations, discussing not only the past but also their dreams and aspirations for the future. Richard shared stories of his own challenges, drawing Tom closer to him. With each conversation, the wound of separation began to heal, and the bond they had lost was being restored. On a sunny morning, the dealership organized a special event to celebrate the new phase of the business. The community was invited, and the excitement in the air was palpable. David, Richard, and Tom prepared, all with a spark of hope and determination in their eyes. When the first customers arrived, the joy was contagious, and everyone could feel that something special was happening. During the event, Richard took to the makeshift stage and with a smile on his face began to speak. Today marks a new beginning not just for our dealership, but for all of us. I want to thank each of you for being here. This place is not just a car store. It's a space where the community gathers, where stories intertwine, and where we can all find support. Tom, standing beside his father, felt a wave of gratitude. He had never imagined he would be there with Richard by his side, sharing this moment. He raised his voice and with sincerity said, "I want to thank David for taking me in during such a difficult time. He not only gave me shelter but made me feel part of something again. This dealership is more than just a business. It's a home for all of us." The audience applauded and David smiled, feeling emotional. The transformation was not just about the business but about the lives being restored there. Each word resonated deeply in the hearts of those present, reflecting the importance of community, friendship, and love. As the event continued, smiles, laughter, and new connections were formed. The shiny cars in the showroom were no longer just products on display. They were symbols of new beginnings, renewed dreams, and stories that were just starting to unfold. At the end of the day, as the sun set on the horizon, David, Richard, and Tom stood together at the entrance of the dealership, reflecting on what they had built. They knew there were still challenges ahead, but the certainty of having each other made everything more bearable. "We're in this together," Richard said, placing a hand on Tom's shoulder. "This is just the beginning, and I'm ready to face the future," Tom replied, with a smile on his face. David watched the two, feeling a deep gratitude for being part of that reunion, for helping to create a space where compassion, generosity, and friendship could flourish. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, there was a new purpose in their lives. A purpose that went beyond their struggles and would transform not only the dealership, but the lives of everyone who crossed their path. What would you do in David's place? Would you have accepted Tom into your establishment without knowing what was to come? Leave a comment below about what you would do, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this one.